On today's episode of Curve Ahead, I am joined by SKV, as he calls himself, the Vice President of Growth at Blaze and founder of his own go-to-market firm, SK Ventures. In our conversation, SKV shares his fascinating journey from Salesforce executive to cannabis industry leader, explaining how he navigated the complex regulatory landscape of this emerging market. As he puts it, cannabis gives him a very good cultural and logical view into how humans think and how policies get created and built. We also dove into what SKV calls the invisible monster, the challenge of overcoming change management resistance when trying to sell software solutions. He reveals his strategic approach to multi-threading sales conversations across different stakeholders within organizations to drive successful adoption. In this episode, you'll gain valuable insights into the nuanced world of cannabis tech and practical strategies for bringing products to market in highly regulated industries where each state has its own complex compliance requirements. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. Yes, absolutely. My name is Shabazz Kara Varani, SKV for short. I'm the Vice President of Growth at Blaze. I also have my own go-to-market firm under a holding company called SK Ventures. Really, my goal and my whole premise is around revenue and people growth. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also a soccer player, formerly a Canadian beach soccer player, and I have a dog named Soda Pop.
Tell me about your background and how that led you to Blaze.
And so I originally from Salesforce, spent 6, 7 years at Salesforce. Still love the company, love the gear, but really at Salesforce, I worked my way up kind of across the chain, starting as an intern right out of school, and was selling all the way to SMB and mid market, and was selling software to different types of companies in New York, Pittsburgh, Boston area. Was there for about like I said, 6, 7 years. And after that, I entered the cannabis industry. Cannabis was being legalized in Canada at the time from a recreational standpoint. And that was kind of at a fork in the road in my life. And I could have kept going at Salesforce, which is an amazing company. But I got this opportunity to go be a head of sales in the cannabis industry. And so I took that and ran with it. And so for the last 8 years, I've been in the cannabis industry pretty much internationally as well as all over North America. And I started consulting with Blaze after I'd worked for a competitor for a long time, and I got to know the CEO and got really excited that I was back in the tech POS, or sorry, the POS game and the technology game. And from there, I was fractionally consulting, and then decided to take on the full-time job not too long ago. Blaze, really quickly, payments, point of sale software and e-com software for cannabis retailers. So very nuanced kind of software, specialized, but also we work with liquor companies as well as, doing some things in hemp, which is effectively cannabis. So that's kind of how I got here.
So you kind of work with what they would quote unquote call like the sin industries.
Essentially, yeah. Sin industries, the vice industries. It's funny
Sure.
though, the biggest sin industry is gambling. And we don't do anything with that. I just think it's wild that gambling is a legal industry. Betting is a legal industry. It blows my mind, but that's for another day.
So you had mentioned that you have a consultancy where you focus on go to market. Where did you learn that passion, bringing new brands to market?
Yeah, man. It's funny when you sell software for a long time, you kind of forget about the other side of it, which is like the software is helping you do something, go to market. And so I started to really, the companies I was working with at Salesforce, I started to just get to know them a lot more. Started to actually do some consulting work for them just on the side a little bit after building a relationship. Started learning about how they launch products and learned from some great CEOs and some great leaders. And when you enter the cannabis industry, it's different from like a place like Salesforce because Salesforce, someone's already built it for you before and someone's telling you how to go to market. Cannabis industry, no one actually knows how to go to market, especially being the first legal nation in Canada. No one really knows how to go to market. And so I really had a passion because cannabis forces you to apply different methodologies and try different things very, very quickly. And there's nowhere to ask or no one to ask. And so I started working with a lot of different organizations, helping them to go to market strategy, all the way from ideation to actually what it means to launch something, all the way to if you're, for instance, at Blaze now, one of the things, we have this platform and, we go to market with a lot of releases for our customers. So that's a little bit of a different go-to-market strategy. So always liked it. Always found it very interesting. I mean, if you can take an idea, take a creation, and go and sell that into the market and get paid for it. I mean, that's a really hard thing to do because what is really a market? A market just something telling you or a group of people saying yes, this is the value kind of thing. So that's what really motivates me when you can do that. And so the other go to market I did was actually took the Canadian beach soccer to market, which is a cool little exercise because no one thinks Canada is a beach soccer nation. But yeah, man, and go to market requires so many different skills, so much listening, so much trying, so much failing. So it's a really cool little skill set that continuously refining.
I've worked with a couple of different organizations bringing them to market, and I actually just sent a debrief email on some of like the lessons learned that I learned over the last quarter trying to help out another brand. It's interesting because there's like never really one playbook, regardless of if it's been done before. There's always something that's nuanced specifically for that organization. So it's a little bit different, although like you can set it to be repeatable. It like I don't know. It's tricky. It takes a lot of input. It takes a lot of learning. It takes a lot of patience and being able to trial and error things, but not get discouraged with it.
Now, ultimately, you got to know, you really got to understand the problem that you're solving. I think is the biggest thing. Like you got to know the problem that you're solving better than the people that you're, solving it for, right? Because you're supposed to be the expert. And so I find a lot of go-to-market strategies fail if you don't actually understand the problem as well as, the impact of solving that problem.
So, as a consultant helping bring brands to market, do you think it's easier to, as a consultant, to do it, or do you think it's better done from the organizational leadership perspective? Does that make sense? So, like
Yeah, yeah,
the
of
founder or
course.
CEO.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, I was doing it with the company and then I came in house and now I'm doing it with them, right? As an actual employee. I don't, that's such a good question. I've never been asked that before. I think that it is harder to do it. I think it might be harder to do it when you're in the company, only because then you start having emotions involved in it. If you're objective, you're a little, third party-ish and you might be more willing to say the hard things or ask the hard questions versus, when you're inside an organization, you really see the inside of that organization. You really need to make it work. So I think it might be inside the organization that's more difficult, but also that depends on your role as a consultant. And the trust that you built with that team and if they take that recommendation or not.
That's an interesting perspective. I haven't necessarily spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I do think that being less partisan to the outcome, right? Like, obviously, you want to see the brand succeed, but you haven't staked everything on it like a founder might.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you join the organization, I think there's perhaps some bias too, whereas like a consultant, you can really just be that objective kind of leader, remove the emotion from it. But also, as a consultant, you don't have that same skin in the game. So you might not be thinking of it from a perspective of a do or die nature kind of thing. So it's a great question. I genuinely don't feel like I get super questions I haven't heard before or anything like that. It's a great question though. I got to think a little bit more on that.
Appreciate that. So let's take a step back and talk about Blaze a little bit more. So you had mentioned that they are a POS and e-com platform specifically for cannabis as well as some liquor businesses. Can you just give me, is that the 15,000 foot of the business, or is there a little bit more to it?
So look, it's the cannabis industry. I don't know how much, whoever's listening to this, I don't know how much they know about the cannabis industry, but it truly is very fascinating. And the reason for it is because it's federally illegal. You have state by state regulations, which are highly, highly nuanced, and you have significant compliance within those regulations. And so because, every piece of cannabis or every pound of cannabis has to be accounted for from basically the seed to the sale, there are a lot of challenges associated with that. And then you tie in the, inability to truly market across, various channels, such as Instagram and Facebook, traditional channels. Then you tie in the idea that you can't use payment, traditional payment rails and banking rails. So, you can't use the Visas, the Mastercards, and things like that. And so, there's a lot that goes into actually selling a dollar of cannabis from that seed to sale. And so a company such as Blaze does it really good and does really well because we really focus on those nuances and focus on understanding each market uniquely while making sure that we pull patterns out of what's happening and then try and bundle and package those patterns and those ideas up into thought leadership so that we can help the whole industry grow. Because the other side of it is cannabis has a ton of stigma. Even in Denver, I was just in Denver the other day, and I heard that still there's some stigma with cannabis over there. Colorado was the first place, really, truly, to legalize, right? And so imagine walking into regular store, you can't buy uh, snacks, right? You can't do that. You can't buy snacks, you can't do any of that sort of stuff. So there's just a lot of silliness and you're battling a lot of stigma. And as a result, that translates into heavy, heavy, heavy compliance. So you need an organization like ours, but it gets tough as well because it's so nuanced. It's kind of trade-off, opportunity cost. Where do you focus on and continue to build? Because you can't be everywhere at once. You have to make your bets.
Yeah, I mean, living in Denver, right, and knowing that cannabis is completely legal here, anybody who hasn't had that experience to go into a dispensary, it's like walking into a jewelry store that instead of having jewelry in it, it's just a ton of cannabis products, which I think is fascinating. But you had mentioned, so there are a ton of states now that have different laws and regulations about what they allow from a sales perspective. How in those regulations have you guys found opportunity?
The opportunity for us within the regulations is in the specialty knowledge that needs to happen in understanding how to navigate those regulations. For instance, there's regulations, very nuanced regulations around delivery and discounting, around different pieces. And one key area that we've really found opportunity is, Starbucks is a great example. Starbucks is a great company, not necessarily a coffee company. They're a fintech company, right? And so with their loyalty program and their bank of Starbucks, right? And so we have found a lot of opportunity in releasing solutions to the industry, such as our own white labeled payments platform. Right. So if you're a retailer, you don't have to go to all these different systems, and we can give you e-commerce, point of sale, loyalty, and we can wrap it all up with payments. Knowing and understanding the nuances by state really allows us to get deeper and launch products relative to that state, sure, but at a whole, because we kind of understand what's happening across the industry, at an aggregate, we can kind of launch game-changing solutions that cater to every retailer, regardless of the state nuance or whatever, because we kind of see everything. Not to say that there's not, it's not a crowded space. It is a very crowded space, many competitors. But it's carving out, it's like the CRM space. There's so many competitors, right? But that's number one. And number two is I think a lot of organizations in this industry try to scale very, very quickly. We have a very measured, curated growth, and we're not necessarily an organization that wants to, raise $1 billion. We really are focused on, providing a really good customer success endpoint for our retailers and the people that we service. And as a result, it allows us to really be lean and flexible so that when we get that feedback, we can actually iterate on it. And that's, one of the reasons I love working at Blaze.
So, I mean, back to the kind of the regulations piece. It's funny, like you had mentioned it with Denver. I know that originally, like one of the things you had mentioned was delivery. I still don't think that Colorado as a whole is fully leaned into having delivery be available. The other thing that I thought was really kind of crazy when I first moved here a little bit over 10 years ago now, that they couldn't advertise like on billboards or whatnot. So what they did was the dispensaries would sponsor the road. like the road cleanup. So then you would actually see the names of the dispensaries. So that's kind of how they got around that regulation of not being able to advertise on billboards. Regulation, being able to identify the trends, do you see that there are certain leader states or cities that have that past regulation, and then you kind of see those similar regulations or legislation passed elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, things are definitely, and that's the thing. It's like so nuanced, right? With each state, and you'd think that Colorado would be like super progressive. And so I was like that, like being in Colorado last week, I was like really surprised to hear that, like, hey, actually, like, there's still even after 10 years and all the tax revenue, right, that's come from it, they're still pushing back for whatever reason. I look, you look at a place like New York, though. New York is very progressive. One of the reasons I moved here is it's, supposedly the global cannabis capital of the world, or hopefully will be. They're very progressive on certain regulations, but also not, right, in terms of, like, again, delivery is huge here because delivery is like New York's convenience place, right? Delivery is massive. Like, you look outside, there's DoorDash, Uber Eats everywhere, right? All the drivers, but they're still, not, you still can't do loyalty. You can't do loyalty points in New York. You can't actually incentivize someone to buy, right? You can't do things like buy one, get one off, right? Because then that's incentivizing a sale. So there's very silly things across each state. And you realize, like, funny, like, coming from Canada, you thought the United States was like the United States or United States. To be honest, it couldn't be more different, if I'm being completely honest. And that I've seen that because cannabis gives me like a very good cultural and anthropological view into how humans think, right? How policies get created are built on how humans think and how they've experienced things, and you know all that. So you can really see progressive states, you can really see non-progressive states. But the cannabis industry is crazy because there's a sister industry, which is the hemp industry, and which is a loophole. And so in all the red states where cannabis is illegal, but like Texas, cannabis is illegal, but Texas has massive hemp. Massive hemp. So it's kind of complicated and it doesn't make sense. Then you have the medicinal industry, right? Which is the third part of it. Then you have the illicit industry. People, everyone has their guy, right? Or their person. And so it's just like a complex mess because, some we weren't around when alcohol got legalized, right? And went through many different iterations with prohibition, but alcohol has never been considered medicine, right? And you can't, I mean, you can ferment your own alcohol, but you can't, necessarily grow your own alcohol, right? Like, it's still a process, things like that. Cannabis is a plant, right? And so it's like, that's what makes it so complicated, because everyone also has a different view on, is it medicine, is it reused for recreational, is it, so it's crazy to say the least.
Yeah. The other thing that's strange, right, is I'm pretty sure 2 years ago in Colorado we passed the legalization of psilocybin, but there it's still no way for us to be able to get access to it. Like, if you want it, you can cultivate it at home, but that's the only way you can really get access to it. And if you do that, right, like, there's no real regulation. So it's interesting how, like, Colorado thinks that they're progressive when it comes to some of these things, thinking that it can be used for medicinal purposes, but then they don't really support it from like a taxation perspective or a regulation perspective. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you go out and you buy cannabis here in Colorado, if you buy it at a dispensary, you're paying between 20 and 25% in sales tax. But I mean, I'm getting off topic here, but
No,
it's
I,
interesting that you like had mentioned alcohol. I do actually remember, I mean, I don't remember, but I've during Prohibition, alcohol could be prescribed as medicine. So like it still what kind of had its own loophole too.
yeah, yeah, it really, it really did. But just going back to the psychedelics and psilocybin thing, there's this concept of a decriminalized uh, industry. So what does decriminalization truly mean? That is like the ultimate gray area. Decriminalization, it's not illegal to have it. It's not illegal to have it, but you just can't buy it anywhere, which is funny. So it's like, that is, in my opinion, that is the best time. I was talking to someone about this. That was the best time to actually start a company, right? Because there's going to be policy, there's going to be something that's happening. But that in itself just gives you a funny information. Well, it's like if I can't buy it anywhere, but I can have it, am I going to either throw it or am I going to go buy it on the black market? And so decriminalization is this gray area before policy, legislation comes out, which typically is beat to death.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. Like I remember having a guys' night out with a buddy of mine, and obviously we were drinking, and I think it was right before psilocybin was passed here in Colorado. And I was like, you know what I should do? Start a mushroom edible company, just like infuse it into chocolates. He's like, no, dude, that sounds so stupid. But now, like, he was talking to me 3 weeks ago and said, hey, man, I just had these great chocolates. They were laced with psilocybin. I was like, you asshole.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's the truth, man. It's the truth, and like I think the world, like you look at what's happening in Europe, and like it's funny, right? Like I think we live in a culture of instant gratification, and so sometimes I have to take a step back and live in it all the time, and I'm like, whoa, like Europe's legalizing, and like Germany's legalizing, and let's say Switzerland, is leading the way in certain things. BC, British Columbia in Canada has psilocybin, I think decriminalize like cannabis, psilocybin, these types of things. Like the world is waking up. MDMA, right? Like there's funny because it's like I can go into a liquor store and buy 20 liters of vodka if I want, and people will be like, "Oh, you having a party?" Right? But if I like want to smoke a joint, it's like whoa, 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 whoa. And so I have to take a step back, and if I look at it from a macro lens, like the world's changing their mind slowly. It's just people are so stuck in their ways, and a lot of it comes from fear, right? Fear of change, fear of what's going to happen to me, fear of what's going to happen to our kids. That the thing is, like they'd rather either squish it out or regulate the crap out of it, which is fine. That's how it has to start. I'm sure that's how alcohol started, and so there's a lot of gratitude there that I have. I think just I don't know how much you know about the cannabis industry, but like there's a lot of carnage in the cannabis industry, and so only the strong will survive. And you're starting to see efficient market forces really take hold in the industry, and you got to run a good business. So another thing that you should know about the cannabis industry is in the states, there's something called 280E, which is effectively a tax code that allows you to write off your expenses against your revenue. Cannabis companies can't do that. They can't write off, their operating expenses. And there's, you couple that with heavy pricing compression, which is, everyone's selling the same thing to an uneducated consumer base, and there's no like specialty stores. So you couple the two of those together, and there's, very slim margins to operate on, right? So it's like, how do you survive? You have no choice. You have to run a good business.
It's that that's very insightful. I didn't know about the tax regulation not being available for the cannabis industry, which I mean it makes sense. I think that's why here in Colorado we've seen so much consolidation when it comes to the number of dispensaries or the brands of dispensaries. I think there's only now like a major handful of like bigger ones that are statewide, and then you find just kind of little mom and pop up shops here and
Yeah,
there also. But yeah, it's interesting. It's a great perspective that very insightful.
yeah, cheers, man. I appreciate that. You hang around with me long enough, I'm sure I'll say something that might catch your eye. But
Yeah, I'm sure you don't give yourself enough credit. So something else that should be insightful. Tell me about what, other than regulations that we've kind of droned on about for quite a while, what is the other biggest challenge your organization faces in the next year? And then what are kind of the steps that you guys are taking to overcome it?
yeah, great question. I think the biggest challenge that our organization faces is moving up market into the enterprise and the mid-market space. We're the people's champ of the SMB, but you see moving up market is tough, right? Because not only does the product need to be there, but you're also battling the invisible monster, I like to call it, that is change management within an organization. No one wants to do any work, let alone change the work that they're doing on the system that they're doing, right? And so this is part of like whatever go-to-market strategy you would deploy, you have to be able to quantify the problem and drive the problem so hard that it's worth the switching cost. So, the other day we were looking at DocuSign versus PandaDoc, and the truth is, I was like, I want to switch to Panda, doc, but the problem just wasn't big enough for me to then go lead it internally, even though I was the champion. I was like, I don't want to do the work if it's not broken, right? And so I think the biggest obstacle is really like there's very little we can do to make someone change. I think people, and this goes for all software in general, and just maybe I'm totally wrong about this. And if I am, I want someone to tell me. But number one, timing, right? Hey, are you looking to make a switch? Is your renewal coming up, right? Two, some sort of externality is happening, right? There's a compelling event, a force. So, for instance, a seed to sale compliance software might be, the state might be moving that, so we'll hop on that, for instance. Something along those lines, or there's a pain point of some kind that's so deep, aka that the software didn't work so hard it didn't allow me to transact, we lost money. And then your job is just to be there at those times and make sure that you can drill in. And a lot of that is staying top of mind with content, thought leadership, having a executive brand, right? Things along that nature, having the best support team, right, that we lean in on. But that is the challenge that I'm going to be facing, and I am facing. But luckily, we're doing a good job of it so far. It remains to be seen, but it's just it's the onus of work on the customer side that is really the fundamental challenge when it comes to the switching costs.
I love that you referred to it as the invisible monster, because it kind of is the true reflection of what it is. Having a background also in CRM, one of the biggest pain points that I would face as part of the implementation team is like getting the data, making sure it was clean, working with the customer to ensure that they were happy, but also putting in the effort that they needed to in order for us both to be successful with the implementation of the new software. So yeah, there has to be a couple of different pressures to coming at an organization at any given time to have them switch. I think it's only like 2% of your total TAM is looking to buy at any given time. It's not high, and it doesn't seem like your odds are that good, but I think that just identifying trends on the customer side that may force them to want to switch or need to switch because of regulations or what have you is a clever way to go about it.
Yeah, man, for sure, for sure. And it's just like that becomes the challenge, right? And so you got to find creative ways to make sure that you're staying top of mind. And a big thing that I'm teaching my team right now is multi-threading, right? If you're not in the room, who's singing your praises? You can't rely just on one person. And so how do you multi-thread? It's the story that you tell in that, A, you need to know each persona and what they're driven by. B, you need to understand how they map back to the org decision structure and tree. And then three, you need to be able to weave the story in between them when you're not in the room. So it's very challenging, but fun, right? It's fun to teach. And try and do, and always looking for tips and tricks from any of your listeners or yourself, man, on what are good ways to do that. We haven't started using deal rooms yet, but it's something that I want to perhaps try.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I would love to hear how that works out for you guys. But yeah, I mean, sales is that I never claimed that I was good at sales, and then I continue to have that conversation with other people, and they're just like, You're doing fine. Don't worry about it. You're doing okay." So maybe it's just my perception of myself not being a salesperson, more or less just positioning myself. Hey, look, I can help you solve this problem that you're facing right now in your business, or externally. Like that's where I position myself. I'm not selling you, I'm just here to help.
Yeah, of course, of course, of course, of course.
Cool.
I mean, yeah, man. I think you and I could talk for hours. Dude. Honestly, this is, you've asked me some questions that I haven't really thought of or been asked in a minute, but I really appreciate the conversation.
Of course. So, being at the end of the podcast, I give 90 seconds to each one of my guests to plug anything that they're passionate about. In your case, that could be Blaze, that could be anything else. So, without further
Sure.
ado, the next 90 seconds are yours.
All right, awesome. I'll take 80. I write a leadership newsletter. It's called Polaris Perspective, www.readpolarisperspective.com. And this leadership newsletter is all around leadership and the rising leader that the world needs in today's chaotic, hypersensitive, and politically tense environment that we live in. And the leadership newsletter is all around taking key things from everyday life and kind of turning them into lessons learned. And there's also a longevity section in there that each week we talk about, the component of longevity, whether it's walking backwards, whether it's, gut health, creatine intake, things like that, as well as there's a media I'm consuming. And so sometimes we write about AI, sometimes we, write about different things in there. But the first component is storytelling, and the idea behind it is really around like helping executive leaders or rising leaders lead better. So check it out. Something I'm very passionate about. We have about 2,300 subscribers. Mean income is around 190K US. VPs, execs, rising leaders, like I said, and publish weekly.
Love that. Love that. Definitely check that out. I'll make sure to plug it when I do my write up.
All right. Awesome, man. Appreciate the time. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.